Dr. Lance Kurke has consulted with and trained executives in dozens of Fortune 500, U.S. government, nonprofit, and military organizations. The following talk has been excerpted from a larger presentation exploring how Alexander the Great recreated reality. This presentation, based on one of 34 episodes detailed in Dr. Kurke's book, The Wisdom of Alexander the Great, examines the battle at the river Hydaspes to show the power of reframing situations to overcome seemingly unsolvable problems.
This is one of the 5 most lopsided battles of all time. In antiquity, until the invention of gunpowder and the use of the pike, larger armies always defeated smaller armies. There are approximately 5 counterexamples of that. We can talk about it after class if you'd like. Incidentally, this is one of those examples. 3 times his size, which should have just creamed the poor Greeks, and furthermore, they had superior technology. They had war elephants, 200 of them. And what's interesting about those war elephants is that horse, you may not know this, but horse and elephant have a natural antipathy. If a horse smells an elephant, it will buck its rider and gallop in stark terror until it can no more smell that elephant. It's the strangest thing. It's true of both Asian and African elephants and all horse. If a horse operates around elephants like you see at the circus, it's because that horse was raised from birth around the smell of elephants. All of Porus, the Indian general king's cavalry, had horse acclimated to elephants. None of Alexander's magnificent cavalry did. Alexander was a cavalry general and won all his battles except city sieges using his cavalry. He can't use his cavalry. His strongest tool is not available to him. Each elephant had a mahout. Mahouts were assigned to elephants at birth, 200 pounds after 22 months gestation. Within an hour, they're up and walking. And a 5-year-old boy is put on the neck of that elephant. You know, they straddle the elephant, they grab hold of the ears, and they tell the elephant where to go. Any of you who've had a bad boss know that feeling, right? And that's how, when they're baby elephants, that's how they drive it. The elephant grows up to be 4,000 to 6,000 pounds, whether it's male or female. And the boy grows up to be a man, and it's a boy because if he dies when he's 10 years old, you can't assign a new mahout to the elephant. The elephant acclimates from birth. And ditto, if you're 20 years old and your elephant dies, you can't go back to the 200-pound elephant. You're too big to grow up with it. So a mahout is paired to one animal for life. That's it. We got 200 mahouts on these elephants. We have military police because, as I'm sure you know, in antiquity, the armies were peasant armies, not professional armies like Alexander. So in the back row, this is maybe 30 rows deep, a mile wide perhaps, half a mile wide. The back row are military police. These are lightly wounded men. They might have lost a hand or something that are used in recruitment and training. They're no good in the battle, but to keep the peasants from deserting in the height of battle, they stand in the back row and they lock their arms and they don't let anybody out of that back row. And most peasant armies had such a thing to reduce desertion. Sarissas, if any of you saw the movie Alexander by Oliver Stone, they did a magnificent army of training the Moroccan army to operate with sarissas. Sarissas are about 18 feet long with a steel point. Alexander made a tiny technological change. His Greek Macedonians are only about 8 rows deep because he's a third of the size of the Indian army and they're going to be slaughtered. They modified the sarissas so that the front row, the sarissa is just long enough to reach beyond the shield of the man in the front row. The length of the short stabbing sword of the Indian soldier plus his arm length, that distance, the sarissa was out in front. The row behind that soldier was that much longer of a sarissa in all 8 rows. So what happens is you have a uniform front of sarissas in front of the Macedonian Greeks, just far enough to protect the front ranks from these short stabbing swords, and it is an impenetrable wall. Ain't nobody coming through that wall. The next thing you need to know about our mounted archers. When Alexander was in Sogdiana, which is Central Asia, he discovered archers who could hit a target about 4 to 6 inches in circumference at 100 meters. In antiquity, long bowmen were the marksmen of the age. They could hit a target that big 9 times out of 10 at 100 yards. That's pretty formidable. These men in Sogdiana could do that while riding on horseback And folks, the syrup hasn't been invented yet. These are riding bareback, steering a horse with their knees, and they can shoot 9 times out of 10 and hit a target that big. That is remarkable. I mean, I know that we've got Marine marksmen today that can hit a quarter at a mile, but it's a different technology, right? Alexander was smart enough to hire 200 of these guys and bring them along with the army. And finally, he had javelin throwers, about 200 of them. They had a quiver on their back. This is one of the very few small number of facts we don't know about this battle from eyewitness accounts. We don't know if there were 8, 10, 12, 14 javelins in the quiver, but pick a number, 10. And these javelin throwers could throw these javelins and hit a target 3 or 4 feet in circumference, 9 times out of 10 at 50 meters, 50 yards. So now you've got all the data you need. Let's look at the battle. We've got a distance here of perhaps a quarter of a mile. Porus is keeping his Indians still, I misspoke, his elephants still amongst the Indians because he doesn't want them to step on the soldiers that are hovering around them to keep the smell around them to protect them from Alexander's cavalry. So they're stationary. And Alexander's army is marching with their sarissas, very methodically keeping a straight front line. Now, I didn't draw it here, but there's some gaps in this for the horsemen to ride through. And the Sogdiana mounted archers ride out 100 yards in front of the Indian troops and systematically each have 3 targets. The first target is the head or chest of the mahout. And the hole in the helmet of the mahout is big enough that the target can be hit. You do your math, you've all had probability and statistics. At 0.9 probability, with 200 archers shooting at 200 mahouts, you need 2, you might get 199 mahouts with 2 volleys. Call it 3 volleys, let's be easy here. And let's say a volley takes 4 seconds, but hey, let's double, let's increase it by 50%. 6 seconds, 18 seconds into the battle, all 200 mahouts are dead. And then they start shooting at militarily significant targets, not shooting the soldiers, but something that's that big, and I'm sure some of you know what it is and are just dying to yell it out. Elephant eyes. Elephant eyes are about that big. And the mounted archers shot every elephant in both eyes. You do the math, it takes 5 or 6 volleys. Call it another 30 seconds. So we're 48 seconds into the battle. All mahouts are dead and all elephants are blind. The Sogdiana mounted archers ride out of there as fast as they can out to the edges. All this time, the Macedonian Greeks have been slowly marching forward with their sarissas, getting closer and closer. Maybe they're 75 or 100 yards away by now. The javelin throwers come running out as fast as they can, and they throw their javelins into the elephant in front of them. They're spread out across. Every elephant gets impaled, long javelin points like this, 2 feet into their bodies, 8, 10, 12 times per elephant. And then they get out of there as fast as they can. At this moment, that wall of sarissas arrives at the front. Remember, you got police, military police in the back row. And you've got 200 elephants who are driverless. Nobody's petting it and saying, it's okay, Bessie, or whatever its name is. It's okay. Be careful, but we're going to be okay. The mahout's dead. The elephants are blind and in grievous pain from these javelins. Well, what would you do if you weigh 6,000 pounds under those circumstances? What happened was the elephants stampeded, and they were hemmed in amongst their own troops by the sarissas in front and their own military police in the back. This is one of the 5 most lopsided, probably the 2nd most lopsided battle of all time. 21,000 casualties in under 2 minutes. Now, the story I just told you is not a story about Alexander the Great. It's a story about you. And the reason it's a story about you is because you are going to face an unsolvable problem. And the reframing here was simple. Cause the enemy to assist in its own self-destruct, make minor technological changes, despite the fact that we're outnumbered, overwhelmed with inferior technology, but you can still reframe the problem and cause this kind of an outcome. Everyone in this room will face problems where you have inadequate resources, you're outnumbered, you're overwhelmed, and you can reframe the problem, just like Alexander did, by figuring out what you have to do such that if you solve that problem, the original problem will go away. Good luck in your careers. I bid you adieu.